Hello, everybody. Here is Michele Romano, and welcome to the second episode of perfoRMind podcast. Today, I'm really honored and thrilled to have with me Dr. Barry Sears, who is still not familiar with him. Barry is an American biochemist, medical researcher, and author, best known for creating and promoting the Zone diet. Specifically, he's a pioneer in inflammation and his correlation with proper nutrition. And in 1995, Sears released his first book, so The Zone, a dietary roadmap. And this book became actually the #1 New York Times bestseller and sold over 2 million copies in the United States. And Barry is constantly holding conferences all over the world, in Europe as well. I personally had the pleasure to attend some of his courses in Italy, and I could always appreciate his ability to share knowledge in such a simple way. So guys, fasten your seatbelts and get ready for this awesome episode with Barry Sears. Hi, Barry. Thank you for joining us today. First of all, I would like to ask you about your background and how did you get into the creation of the Zone diet?
Well, my background is that of any typical research scientist, basically getting your degrees, finding some very small area in science and hopefully to exploit that. And that's my background. My background is really developing lipids as drug delivery systems for cancer drugs. And at the time, this is back in the early, late 1970s, I was probably by default one of the leaders in the world of making such lipid-based delivery systems. But in 1982, my world changed completely. That's when the Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded for understanding how a certain group of hormones called eicosanoids controlled inflammation. And these eicosanoids basically were the building blocks of them were coming from the same lipids I was using for drug delivery systems. So I said, this looks like a much bigger area. And it was. However, it was a much more complex area than I ever anticipated. So it's led me on a 40-year journey to understand how the body turns on and turns off inflammation. And once you can begin to crack that code, you understand now the differences between what we call illness and wellness. We define illness as saying, yeah, you have a symptom, I'm sick, and we'll give you a drug to treat the symptoms. But we really don't have any good definitions for wellness. People say, if I'm not sick, I must be well. It's not quite the same. So that has led me into a meandering journey to understand how the food we eat, which seems so mundane, controls our metabolism, which people say, what's that? A very simple definition of metabolism is we put food in our mouth and it allows us to survive. And that makes it probably the most complex area of biotechnology. So 40 years later, I'm still on the same pathway of understanding how we put food in our mouth to allow us to survive and hopefully stay well.
Yeah, looks amazing. I mean, I know about your story and actually about your family, that you basically had this drive and this motivation to understand how to live healthy, as you told us, and how to prevent certain kind of diseases. Is that true?
That's true. Again, as my whole family has a long history of early mortality from heart disease. My father was a world-class athlete, and he died in his early 50s of heart disease, as did his brothers, as did my grandfather. So I knew I carried the same genes. So that gave me the impetus to move into understanding how to change the expression of those genes. You couldn't change the genes, but could you change their expression? And by doing so, live a longer life than you'd otherwise expect.
So you mentioned inflammation. For the average person, maybe is something not that common. So could you just briefly explain us what are we talking about?
Well, when we think of inflammation, we think of something that's bad. It hurts. And that's exactly what inflammation is. It's a signal to you that basically something is invading your body. Now, if we didn't have inflammation, we'd be a sitting duck in the world. Microbes would attack us readily. We would not be able to fight back. Our physical injuries would never heal. So that's why we had to have inflammation to turn on our response. Say, okay, basically get to the problem. And then you have to turn it off. Scientifically, that's called resolution. So if you can balance those two powerful forces built in our genes, how to basically turn on inflammation, but then turn it off, then you have really the key to how we heal. And this is when we look at most chronic diseases. Yes, they're caused by inflammation, or they're associated with inflammation. But in reality, what they are caused by is the lack of resolution, the lack of turning off inflammation. And as a consequence, these injuries never heal completely. And eventually, at some point in time, they develop into chronic disease. It could be heart disease for some, others, it could be cancer. Others still, it might be autoimmune diseases or neurological diseases. But their underlying inception was an inflammatory response that was not turned off completely. And as a consequence, the body or that organ was being maintained under constant inflammatory attack until there's enough in-organ damage. We call it a chronic disease.
Yeah, I read actually two of your books, and first of all, the first you made when I was born, actually, so I was 27 years ago, and I could read even the positive nutrition, so another one, and I still have to read resolution diet. So what would you recommend to a person if anybody wanna get into this field or understand more about nutrition? Do you recommend one of your books, or would you recommend just joining a conference that you held? Because I know that usually you are coming even in Europe to hold some conferences. Yeah.
Well, I've written 19 books so far. So rather than saying reading all 19 books, that makes no sense. But my most recent book, called The Resolution Zone, gives an insight into where this whole field is going. And actually, I'm working on my 20th book right now. It's called The Wellness Zone. And what I try to do in this book and the previous books is to outline the incredibly complex biochemistry that takes place in our body and how it can be controlled by the food, either positively or negatively. And if you crack that code, you have the keys to the kingdom to a longer and better life. And when we talk about hormones are hundreds, if not thousands of times more powerful than drugs. And so you say, well, that's where the action is. Say, exactly. But the most powerful hormones are the ones induced by our diet. So again, it's basically looking at a ever-growing picture of complexity. And my job is to try to understand that and then reduce it into dietary formats that are easy to follow. In fact, your grandmother told you exactly what they were. She said two things. Basically, eat all the vegetables on your plate. Said, well, what did she know? Actually, she was giving me some very, very sage advice. And two, she would say, you can't leave the house until you take your cod liver oil. World's most disgusting food, but again, giving very sage biochemical advice of how to resolve inflammation. Now, from what your grandmother is telling you, say, next steps is saying, it is pretty much that simple. It's a matter of discipline. And basically what you're looking to do is to balance your plate every time you eat. You'd have to take enough of the nutrients that we usually get not enough of, omega-3 fatty acids being one of those. Another are called polyphenols. These are the chemicals that give fruits and vegetables their color. That's why your grandmother said, eat them. And if you basically can now learn to balance them, you can basically go into the deep depths of metabolism to basically reprogram your immune system, reprogram your entire metabolism to achieve a longer and better life. Now, if you don't, then basically all hell's going to break loose and say, what happened? I started gaining weight. I started getting sick. I started dying at an earlier age. Saying, because you are not paying attention to the basic rules, which haven't changed in 40 million years, and they won't change tomorrow.
Yeah, you touched a good point actually, and personally, I'm working as a strength coach in a professional basketball team in Germany, and I try to like give some tips about nutrition to my players actually, but I still have to struggle with some habits that are not connected to what our grandma told us. So as you told us. Basic rules and just eat as natural as possible with balanced diet. And I mean, I've been doing that for all my life. I've been never sick, and I'm always energetic with a lot of really energies to do everything I need to do. And but could you tell us more about the hormones? So you mentioned hormones. Could you tell us maybe the difference between glucagon and insulin and the influence from eicosanoids?
Well, the eicosanoids are the hormones derived from fats that turn on inflammation. We have to have some, but not too much. Another group of hormones derived from omega-3 fatty acids, these turn off inflammation. So we have to have that balancing off. So we can turn that switch on and off. Then we have hormones coming from proteins. Most likely, in terms of balancing blood sugar, there's the hormone glucagon that comes from protein that brings down blood sugar, or no, brings it up from the liver, and the hormone insulin coming from carbohydrates that bring down blood sugar. So we need to have these always constantly being balanced. Now, from a standpoint, when you mentioned talking about professional athletes, those were my first test subjects. And why? Because they live in a world of inflammation by choice. They are constantly inflamed. So when I was looking, once I had developed the basic technology, I said, who can I test it on? Well, let's take the people who basically have the greatest ability to withstand if I make any mistakes. And these would be the world-class athletes. And so the first testing of the zone concept was actually in the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, when I was working with one university swim team in the United States, and the members of that swim team won 7 gold medals at the Barcelona Olympics. Very good for one country, extraordinary for one university. And because I was able to give them a tremendous hormonal advantage over their competitors. And since that time, we've worked with many elite athletes, in every major sport, from the NBA to Major League Baseball to one of our best examples was the 2006 Italian world champion soccer team. Now, most of your listeners may be too young to remember that, but this was the last time Italy won the World Cup. Yeah. But they were led by really old guys, not the young, really the old ones who bought into the concept. Mm-hmm. And so that once we knew we're not going to kill anybody, we said, okay, now we can apply this to a wide range of chronic disease states, which are all characterized by inflammation.
Yeah. That's so common. I mean, as you told, inflammation is so present, but after all, we have to manage that in order not to live in a chronic state of inflammation. So this being said, is the carb loading a myth?
The answer is yes. Say, well, but my trainer told me. So, well, your trainer was wrong. Now, what you want to be doing is basically, think about hormonal balancing. So yes, hormones are so powerful. So if I can balance my hormones, that is the secret to success. Now, that requires a little more discipline and requires a little more knowledge. But if you're willing to do that, then basically you have an edge in terms of not only athletic performance, but you have an edge in life. You have an edge that allows you to live better, to live longer. It's all about the hormones. So think of hormones as communication systems. Now, let's say if someone took away your cell phone today, you say, oh my God, my life is ruined. Well, the cell phone or any computer system, it looks like a tinker toy compared to the complexity and the control systems that you find in metabolism. Mm-hmm. So if you think taking away your cell phone will make your life miserable, let your hormones run wild, and basically you'll have a much more difficult time. So again, it's trying to take these very complex concepts. I said, break them down into understandable concepts, and then have a dietary system that one can follow on a lifetime basis.
Yeah. So the zone the name comes actually from that state where you feel energetic and on the top of your capabilities. Is this right? So from the zone diet?
That is true. Actually, it comes from the world of pharmacology. We talk about a therapeutic zone for a drug. If you give too little of the drug, it doesn't work. You give too much of the drug, it's toxic. So you want to keep that drug in a therapeutic zone, kind of a Goldilocks zone. And that concept is exactly what you're trying to do here with your hormones, but now not using a drug, but using your diet to do that. Now, athletes, when they talk about being in the zone, they say, well, what is that thing? I don't know, but when I'm in that zone, life is easy. Everything just is, slows down so I can see everything. So it's, but when you leave the zone, say, everything speeds up again and life becomes difficult. So from the athletic description of the zone or the pharmacological description of the zone, they're both talking about the same. How can we find that sense of where life becomes easy? And if we do, then whatever your goal, either to stay well or to win an Olympic gold medal, becomes more likely.
So I've heard so many times about the zone diet associated with a high protein intake. So usually, even at the university, I had several arguments with the professors that were holding some nutrition classes. So what are your thoughts on this about the zone and protein intake?
Well, it'd be nice if the professors had actually read my books before they made those statements. Again, the zone diet is based upon one thing. What is the amount of protein you need to maintain your muscle mass? It depends. It depends on how much muscle mass you have. It depends on how active you are. So once you know that, basically you can calculate those two factors, how much muscle mass you have and how active you are, how much protein you need to maintain that. That you have to get in the course of a day, spread equally throughout the day like a drug. Now, once you basically know how much protein you need, that automatically sets how much carbohydrate you need to balance those hormones of insulin and glucagon. So once you know the protein, that sets the amount of carbohydrate. And what about the amount of fat? You don't need much. How much do you need? Actually, when you can see your abdominal muscles, you have 6. When you can see more than 2 abdominal muscles, you probably need more fat in your diet. But this is why most people have never seen their abdominal muscles in the last 30 years. So you say, eat the least amount of fat. Now, why that combination of protein, carbohydrate, and fat work together? Because it's how it affects metabolism. So now if you do it and get it correctly, it's about 40% of your diet coming from carbohydrates, 30% from protein, 30% from fat. What nobody ever did, because they never got to page 26 of my first book, was say, but it's also a calorie restricted diet. And so once you basically put that in the equation, the amount of protein that you're recommending is exactly what people are eating in Italy and the United States a day. No more, no less. What you're doing, you're basically saying that sets how much carbohydrate you need and how much fat. So it's like a carburetor of a car. You can't run a car all on gas. You can't run it all on air. You need some combination. And the better the combination, the better the mileage. In this case, it's the hormonal mileage.
And most of the people know that low-calorie diet or low-calorie style of life or nutrition is correlated to longevity.
Exactly. It's called calorie restriction, but calorie restriction without malnutrition. This is the most powerful drug we have known in medical science to extend lifespan and more importantly, extend health span. They say, well, but it sounds so simple. If you do it correctly, what it does, it is genetic engineering. The correct application of calorie restriction basically turns on about 1/3 of your genes, turns off another 1/3 of your genes, and the other last third, they aren't affected. But just the food I put in my mouth will basically change the expression of my genes? Say, yes. Well, which one? Well, you got 20,000 genes. You're going to change the expression of 16,000 of those 20,000 genes. Say, that's impossible. That's biotechnology. Say, that's right. Drugs can't do this. But if you are able to basically, take the amount of calories your body needs, and that's why we work with Olympic athletes. Say, well, I'll always be hungry. No, you won't if you can balance protein and carbohydrate, because you can stabilize blood sugar levels. Now, who would that also be important to? Diabetics. And so this is why in the United States, the zone diet is used to treat type 2 diabetes by Harvard Medical School. Why? It stabilizes blood sugar levels. Now, if you don't have diabetes, what's the benefits of stable blood sugar levels? I'm never hungry. I'm never tired, because all the cells are basically making enough ATP that they can perform at high levels of activity. So I always really prefer to have the professors to actually read the book to see what it says before they make those statements. But the fact is, you're looking at this as a drug. You need the right dosage. The right dosage for an individual depends on really their percent body fat. That's how you calculate your amount of lean body mass. If you're very, very fat, you don't need that much protein. If you're very lean and very active, you're going to need a lot more protein. Not that much protein. I'll use one of the athletes I've worked with in the past who needed a lot of protein. His name was Shaquille O'Neal. Because he's a little bigger than you and I, and fairly active. Other athletes who basically a little higher size would include people like LeBron James. But even my Olympic athletes, none of them, and these were all gold medal winners, ever consumed more than 2,500 calories per day. That's all they needed to control their hormones. And as a consequence, they perform better.
Yeah, I think that Shaquille O'Neal was performing a lot when he was younger. Right now, I think he lost the zone a little bit because.
Because that's why I say it requires discipline, and so but nonetheless, that even when he was at his peak performance, he was at about 370 pounds. So, but he had a lot of lean body mass, and so again, that's why it's an individualized program, and it's individualized that fits anybody's dietary philosophy. You can be a vegan and follow the zone diet. You can be basically a paleo advocate and follow the zone diet. You can be a lacto-ovo vegetarian and follow it. You can be an omnivore. So I say it doesn't matter what your dietary philosophy is, but your goal is the one and the same. I want to be in the zone.
Yeah. Good. So Barry, what are you working on lately? Do you have any upcoming event?
Well, what I'm working on right now is basically going deeper into the area of metabolism. And when we talk about metabolism, it's complex, but in there, in every cell in your body, and you have 37 trillion cells in your body, is basically a master regulator. And that master regulator is called AMPK. And that is the one key enzyme that really is under profound dietary control. And so we've been working more and more on developing increasingly more sophisticated dietary technologies to basically maintain AMPK in that zone. And if you do, then you've cracked the Gordian knot of chronic disease where I started 40 years earlier. I say, okay, what do I have to do? Say, keep AMPK activated. How do I do that? What drug do I use? There's no drug. Well, how do I do it? It's the diet. The diet is the drug. And now if you have that, you have the ability to basically now get that longer and better life and better performance that we all want to achieve.
So in conclusion, I know you were in Rome for a conference at the
Yes.
Master of Nutrition. And are you coming back to Europe again during the next years? Do you have any? Yeah.
If I'm invited back, of course I'd come back. Who doesn't want to come back to Europe? Not Europe, it's Italy. Who doesn't want to come to Italy? So yes, I'll probably be back there in September.
Okay.
And hopefully to basically talk about some of the new things we're doing, because the beauty of this work, new things are showing up all the time.
Yeah.
And it just is so you have an area of science that never gets stale. And so you always have hopefully new things to talk about.
Yeah, sounds good. Really, I'm looking forward attending one of your conferences or courses and listen again to you. So thank you a lot, Barry, for your insights, for your tips and experience, because you shared a lot of knowledge today. And I hope to see you soon. And I know that you're training a lot as well, besides nutrition and eating properly. So good training sessions.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and again, that it's been, like I say, it's been a wonderful journey, and so again, it's like an old Greek saying that how do you basically measure a meaningful life? They say societies grow great when old men plant trees whose shade they'll never sit in. So hopefully, I've done my job to basically begin to plant some trees for the next generations to have the shade.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. You definitely are doing a great job at sharing knowledge and helping people. So really, thank you again, and have a good day, and I hope to see you soon.
I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you very much.
Bye, Barry. Thank you.
Bye-bye.